Okay. I can see some people seem to struggle to join us, and I'm not really sure. Do we still have colleagues who cannot join us? Hopefully not. Okay. So maybe what we'll start off today, because I think there are some teething problems generally with how we start every time, but don't worry about it. I think it's important we make a start, and we'll see how that goes. And on the way, we will break out for different issues. So first thing to say is I have a lot of stuff to talk to you about, but I'm very keen for these classes to maintain a high degree of interactivity. So I will be talking to you about various things. I will be turning to you with questions. You're very welcome to switch on your microphones and respond. You're equally welcome to type in the chat. Whatever works best for you, please do it. Switching on your microphones is not a bad idea at all. Usually it helps the class become a little bit more active. And it gives you also a better opportunity to be more discursive about the issues we want to develop. But by all means, whatever you feel more comfortable with, the important bit is that you use every opportunity to participate, because I think that's going to be really helpful for your own learning as well. So don't, at any minute, don't hesitate to interrupt me. Don't hesitate to, even if you have something that is not clear to you, if I mention something that you don't understand, that you don't know what it is, totally stop me and make sure we clarify every bit and every detail as we go. Because you are so many, and I have no way to be able to tell who is raising a hand, who is not, any of that. I think it's safer if you just switch on your mics and you talk, if you want to talk. I mean, if that becomes too noisy and that's many of you talking, then okay, I'm going to let you know. But I think for now, to make sure that the conversation is happening, just go for it. So that's that for the beginning. Now, let me begin by saying that, does any of you attend any energy news lately? What happened? No responses. Has there been anything interesting in the energy news recently? Have you seen anything that was of interest?
I read something yesterday that said gas prices had increased 250% since January in the UK.
Correct. So for somebody who's asking there, so the question was if you've heard anything interesting in the energy news recently. We got a response from one of your colleagues saying that gas prices have gone through the roof recently. And that's true. It is actually happening. We have an insane increase of gas prices at a very peculiar time in history, in the annual cycle, if I should put it this way, in the first instance. So why is that the case? So typically, like in every type of market, gas prices are exposed to demand and supply pressures. So when you have a lot of demand, there will be a lot of demand and less supply. Prices skyrocket. That's the typical structure in a floating price scheme. Now, what is happening now is a bit bizarre. Why is it bizarre? What's happening with demand now? We're approximately end of September. What's interesting now for gas supply? Is it a particularly pressured period for gas? Have a think.
We probably would be gearing up to transition into the winter period now, so I'd expect demand would increase over the next couple of months. But coming out of summer, gas usage is typically low. So yeah. I think for me, it would probably be an issue with like more of a supply side issue. So things with transmission costs, asset rentals, etc., that could be causing the increase.
So yeah, that's a good point. Let's have a little think. So are all of you right now based in Rimini or somewhere else? Or are you also joining from other places?
Other places.
Yeah,
so
also from other places.
come on, type some of the other places on the chart. I want to see. So the reason I'm asking you is that even myself, being in the UK, and even though today it's not a particularly warm day, yeah, I mean heating is off. Yeah, we don't use heating yet. So it is quite an interesting one that at a period where we don't really use heating. I don't know how it is at the places where you guys are. I see most of you in Italy, some of you northern than Rimini, somebody unique. Do you guys use heating right now?
Yes.
No, we don't. I'm
okay,
not.
So somebody does. Okay. Okay, so I'm asking you that because the main driver for gas demand in Europe is the heating season. We use gas for other purposes in Europe. Don't get me wrong; it's not just for heating homes. But Baku, oh wow, okay. Azerbaijan, okay, that's a different place altogether. So we use heating in Europe, gas in Europe, mostly for heating purposes, right? So we use it as well for electricity generation and for other purposes, for chemical production and so on. But the truth of the matter is that we tend to have gas as a, you see the main price signal for gas markets is really consumption for heating. This is what really brings the market up quite significantly. Now, why is that interesting? Because right now is not a high heating season yet prices have gone through the roof completely. So as your colleague mentioned before, that indicates supply questions in many ways. So that means that our gas in Europe, which is mostly coming from the east, is not necessarily up to speed. And that's true. The main gas pipelines that are coming to Europe are not running at full capacity right now. There's another thing which is kind of speculatory in terms of gas prices, and that is the expectation that gas prices will only rise in the next period. So what does that mean, and where do we have it? So it means that if you were to expect that your gas price is going to be, I don't know, even higher in a month's time or in 2 months' time, then you're willing to pay today a high price already. If you think that the forthcoming price will be even higher, then today's price doesn't sound very bad, actually, even if it's high. And that is partly what is happening, because there's a bit of a market panic right now, where lots of people who want to buy gas fear that if gas is already expensive in September, what's going to happen in December? It's going to be mayhem with gas prices. And that might be true. We don't really know what's going to be happening in December, because everything depends on gas flows from Russia predominantly to Europe. Really, this is the biggest parameter affecting all of that. So that's where we are at the moment with the gas issue. Why am I mentioning that? Yeah, that is because I want us to start having, it's a very early stage, and we haven't discussed at all about market dynamics or any of that. I just thought I would start you off with a little bit of the current affairs and what is happening. I'll share with you, let me see if I can share with you a couple of a website I have here, just to help you a little bit browse through some of the implications of what we see right now. If I go here and I share my screen with you, can I do that? Windows, yes, that's the one. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
It's a map.
Yes.
Yes, of course.
It's a map with prices and stuff. Yeah, can you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Yeah. So this is the Apex Spot market. This is essentially an energy market. Yeah, it's one of the several energy markets. Energy and other such commodities are being traded in markets like a stock market. There's no real difference. There are markets with specific contracts and specific dynamics, specific arrangements. There's no significant difference from what you would probably already have seen in normal stock markets. Contract dynamics are maybe a little bit different, and contract arrangements are a little bit different in terms of, there is no high frequency trading, there is no millisecond type of trading. These things don't exist in energy markets, but you have the equivalents because in energy markets you deal with physical flows to some extent, at least. So you want to be able to have the contracts that could be delivered in reality. They're not always delivered. Sometimes they're traded before they're being delivered, but that's that's one of the parts of the market. So what I want you to see very quickly here is a few of the prices you see here. So every price you see reflects a specific part of a certain country or a whole country market if a country has one market by itself. Yeah. So take a quick look. Tell me if you see any odd things happening in here. So these are, just for your understanding, these are day-ahead prices for electricity trade in Europe. Yeah, in some European, it's not all European countries, in some European countries. The part that is important to flag here is, so day-ahead is essentially contracts traded today for delivery tomorrow. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, so it's one cycle of contracts that is being traded today, and the idea is that is the price that will be paid tomorrow on tomorrow's delivery. So do you see any odd things happening here?
North Europe is pretty cheap compared to the other.
Mention countries. Go for countries directly.
I think Sweden, Norway, Scandinavian countries. But this is so weird because they are the coldest countries in the Europe, but the prices are lower than the other countries.
Let me flag something here. This is electricity. This is not gas.
Oh, sorry. I thought that is.
So this electricity prices here. It's not gas. They're relevant. They're not completely, disconnected. They're relevant, and we'll explain soon why. But in the meanwhile, I want you to think of it as, it's different markets. They have different dynamics.
Also, like Sweden and Norway have different values within the same country, whereas other countries have just one value, like France has 153, and they have different values depending on the latitude. Yes.
Correct. So let's pick on this one a little bit. If you see Norway has, a price, if you go all the way north, that is 49.10, and then goes down a little bit to 64.12 and all of that, and goes all the way down to 113. So that's more than double than what the lowest price in the north is. Yeah. Why is this happening, you reckon?
Maybe because they use wind power, more of wind power.
Solar energy.
Say it again. What was the last one?
Solar energy.
Okay. So you see, Norway runs almost exclusively on hydro. So that affects all of the country, pretty much north to south. What is interesting is, when you see prices like that and such differentials on prices, what is normally happening is lack of interconnections. So probably at the north, there is enough supply right now, because hydropower is probably providing enough in relation to the demand. But there is not enough cabling, there aren't enough cables of enough capacity to be able to transfer that energy to the south. Yeah, so there's an abundance of energy to the north, but that is not adequate to take all that energy to the south and really equalize the price along the country. In a similar way, there are connections of limited capacity to Sweden. So what I want you to be thinking of is, are there any, what we call in markets, arbitrage opportunities here? So arbitrage opportunities means when you have price differentials, there is profit to be made, and for these price differentials to be eliminated. Yes, so if, for example, if you take an extreme example here, let's see the UK, yeah, that has, actually it's England, it's England's market predominantly, that is 247 pounds, yeah, and across the channel, France is 153 euros. So that's approximately 1 on 2, the differential, yeah. So if you were to convert pounds to euros, that would be about 300, approximately 300 euros, and France is 153. So that's 1 on 2, which is quite a crazy difference. You don't see this kind of differences very often between, you know, nearby countries. So from a market point of view, what you would have expected to see here, if that was a different commodity, if that was price for apples, what would you have expected to happen?
That they would be importing and exporting from another country, where the price is lower, they'll export to the other country where the price is higher.
Yeah, you would have expected tons of apples moving from France to Britain, right? I mean, if you exclude Brexit from the equation, that makes all of these things very difficult. You would have normally expected trade flows to go from France, from the lower price country to the higher price country. That would increase demand in France, clearly, because essentially it would decrease supply in France rather, and it would increase supply in Britain. So ideally, if there was unlimited capacity for these flows to happen, the price would become equalized. Is this correct? Is this clear to everyone?
Yeah.
As a theoretical model, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy to happen, but in theory, this is what would happen. Yeah, it makes sense for all of you. Nobody thinks this is crazy. Good. Okay, so let's think a little bit now in the case of electricity. Why is it not happening? What do you reckon? Why nobody is taking electricity from France to sell it to the UK, even though they could make so much money with it?
Because of grid interconnectedness or lack thereof, right? Like in Latin America, we see the same thing where countries, they want to sacrifice maybe lower prices in exchange for preserving regional energy security. So here, I mean, what's happening in a lot of these countries, they don't have, you know, perfectly connected grids, so these arbitrage opportunities aren't readily available.
So a huge thing in all of this conversation is infrastructure. Yeah. So, and somebody has asked, but yeah, somebody has written this on the chat. Yeah. So it is a big thing of infrastructure. So do we have enough cables with enough capacity to transfer that electricity? The answer is no, we don't. In most cases, between most countries, there is some interconnections. There are interconnections between most countries. These do exist, but they're not as powerful, as strong as we would normally require them to be able to absorb such price differentials and create the difference that we need. So that is the main barrier, let's say. And the reason why we don't have that many cables is what? Why don't we have them? Because that's a lot of money to be made. Why don't we have these cables?
Maybe because we don't have a common system. I don't know, like there is a common energy system through the Europe. So
that is partly the problem. So coordination is part of the problem. That's true. But it's also the fact that we very rarely have that kind of insane price differentials that we see right now in Europe. These price differentials, they do, you know, some price differences exist, but they're normally not that crazy as you see them right now. So that is the main reason why you might not be seeing, you know, infrastructure building up so fast. There's another thing to point out here. So, sorry, please, yeah.
Can we say that in Scandinavian countries, because the supply of the electricity is greater than the demand, so it's going to cheaper. But for example, in the south of Europe, because the demand is greater than supply, I mean, in their countries, not about the importing and exporting,
Yeah.
and because of that, the prices are different.
Yeah, sure. It is a difference between supply and demand and capacity of the market to transfer resources in and out of the country in order to, increase supply if required, or sell excessive supply somewhere else when that's required, and all of that. Now, you can see some very clear things here. Yeah? I mean, even in the Scandinavian countries, you can see, for example, Finland has a very expensive price. If you were to compare it with, I don't know, say North Norway, and these are connected. Yeah, these are connected over land. You can see up here, there is North Norway connected with Finland, and their price differential is crazy. That totally indicates lack of interconnections between the two places. Yeah, that is the main reason. There is not enough cabling interconnection between the two countries to be able to smoothen these differentials. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you have dealt at all previously with energy markets, would you know what is the normal price for electricity around Europe? I mean, it's different between different countries and different between seasons and all of that, but these prices now are very high. What are they like? Like, if you were to look, I don't know, a year ago, what would they be? Any ideas? Have you seen prices before?
I know in the UK it does depend on like the cap that's set by regulators, how much they can charge yearly for like energy supply. I don't know if that's the same across Europe though.
Okay, let me try to help with that, because that is a little bit of a misunderstanding here. So your colleague said, that there is a price cap that sometimes the regulators impose, and that is relevant to the price that consumers will pay. Consumers, as in me and you that will have households. That is not exactly linked here, because the prices you see right now on this map, these aren't retail prices. So when we talk about retail prices in electricity, that is the price that consumers pay, yeah, like household consumers. The prices you see here on the map, they're wholesale prices, so they're the stock market prices. These two are not always connected. In reality, for most of us, they're not connected at all. Most of us pay a fixed price over the year. So per unit of energy, per unit of electricity, we have a fixed price, and then depending on how much we consume, we pay that many units of energy, multiply the price we have fixed. What you see here is the day-ahead market, which is the stock market part, and that fluctuates quite a lot. So these are two very different things, and on the wholesale market, no regulator ever touches their hands at all. It's not because that would be price manipulation. It's illegal. You cannot touch that. So that's free market flowing type of marketing. There's no. It's like regulators imposing something in the stock market. It's not really. It's not something that they can do. Or it's allowed for them to do. So these are two different markets. So in terms of actual prices that we've seen before, these typically tend to be around 50 euros. Yeah. So this is per megawatt hour, by the way. The unit here is megawatt hour, is money per megawatt hour. So normally it will be around 50. That is a typical price. You see, sometimes it falls even below that. Sometimes it goes up to 60, 70, 80. When it is 80, we're thinking, oh my God, it starts to be expensive. But now here, you see these crazy prices, which are so much higher. Now that links us to what we were talking about earlier, that there is a shortage of gas supply in Europe right now. And that is mainly a supply question. It's not because we have a huge demand. It's because supply is actually lower than what we have expected this time of year, because it doesn't come as much as we thought it would be mainly from Russian pipelines. Now, That causes an issue down on electricity. Why? Why does gas supply shortage cause a price spike with electricity?
Maybe because there are substitutes.
There are substitutes. Are they? They're not. You're near the answer, but that's not the answer. I should put it this way.
Maybe because you can get electricity starting from gas, burning it. If you burn the gas, you can get electricity.
Correct. A lot of our electricity supply is run by gas. Yes, so we burn gas to run gas turbines, to run combined cycle gas turbines and open cycle gas turbines and whatever. And we produce a lot of electricity. A lot of electricity in Europe comes from gas. And I would say that partly, it's not the only parameter, but partly you see very expensive prices here for countries that rely a lot on gas. Yes, so for countries that their electricity relies a lot on gas. The UK is one of them, by the way. The UK is one of the countries that need a lot of gas to supply their electricity system. A lot of electricity production in the UK is gas-based. Much more so than, for example, North Norway, or for example, Poland, yeah, that have very low electricity prices in comparison to the UK. So that's one, it's only one of the reasons, okay? It's not the only reason, but it is definitely one of the reasons. So you see that there's that link then. So when gas prices go up, electricity prices will go up in pretty much, many countries, because many countries rely to some extent to gas supplies to run their electricity power stations. Now, there's another thing here, and that is other circumstantial things that might be happening in different countries. So these things could be, for example, in the UK right now, we have 7 outages for our nuclear power stations. We have 7 nuclear power stations which are not operational right now. 5 have been closed for some time now because of scheduled maintenance and other issues. And another 2 have closed because we've had, some cracks have been seen in certain parts of the domes. So they needed to have inspections and all of that. So they had to close as well. So in the electricity market in the UK, we were already heading for a difficult winter because we knew that 5 to 7, as it happened recently, nuclear power stations would be off the way. They wouldn't be able to produce anything. So that's, again, another reason why there is lack of supply. So it has created an even greater price, which is what's causing an even higher price in the UK, right? At the same time, there's something else happening. And what is that something else? Can you imagine any other reasons? Not just for the UK, but for other countries as well.
Maybe carbon emission permits.
Correct. So we do have significant carbon pricing right now. So it used to be tiny. It used to be, 2 or 3 euros per ton, but it's hitting 50 and some days 60 euros per ton. So that, again, has a significant impact on pricing now. And it has a significant impact on pricing when there is a specific type of weather happening. And what is that type of weather? Can we speculate?
Can you repeat the question?
Of course, yeah. First of all, just to say, for those of you who find all of this a bit of a challenge, don't worry too much. I'm just trying to start you from the deep waters of what this module will do. We will go back and explain everything we've done today, in a huge depth and quite a good, good level of detail. But I wanted us to begin with understanding the types of problems we're in because of, where we stand with the energy transition overall. So let me take you to this then. normally, somebody mentioned before, about carbon pricing. So that is that we pay a specific permit price for every ton of carbon dioxide we emit. Yeah, because that's a climate change gas, and we need to regulate it and restrict it. So that is essentially a policy that is there to discourage the use of fossil fuels in the energy supply. Because fossil fuels are the ones that emit carbon dioxide when they're used. So if you price them with our carbon dioxide permit tax, essentially you make them less price favorable. Now, that sounds all good if you have something to substitute fossil fuels with. What would you normally substitute fossil fuels with if you wanted to decarbonize? What would that be?
Renewables. Renewable energy. Yeah.
Correct. Various types of renewables. Now, a core area for renewables is, can you see my mouse cursor moving?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Okay, good.
Yes.
So in this area here in the North Sea, yeah, you do have a few countries neighboring here. It's England, Scotland, Denmark, Germany, Belgium, France. Did I forget anything? I don't know. Norway. So these countries here share resources, share the North Sea wind energy area. This is one of the best wind energy areas in Europe, and practically really in the world, to be honest. It has relatively good supply of wind resource. It has relatively shallow waters, so you can install offshore wind farms quite well. And there are some great installations of offshore wind farms in this area. Such is the case that when there is enough wind supply in this area, this electricity production is adequate to moderate and regulate pricing across these countries of North Europe. Yeah, so there is enough wind power generation to help drive prices down. And when that happens, also carbon pricing comes down because you burn less fossil fuels. And as a result, there are fewer payments to be made for carbon permits. As things are at the moment, we're in a period that has lasted already for a bit longer than anybody have expected, where we don't have very strong winds. So as a result, our wind farms in this area don't produce that much energy, unfortunately. At the same time, solar production is not great, which again is a bit problematic. So we end up relying quite a lot on fossil fuels right now to have electricity production, which comes with significant carbon permits, in addition to the gas price, which is already very high. So that is the situation we're in. It's a part of the energy transition here, but really it's not a negative part. It's just, a peculiarity. It's something that we need to design appropriate markets for. It's something that we need to design appropriate infrastructure for, and so on, so we can handle all of these issues. Now, unless you have any immediate questions about whatever we've said right now, I'll take us back to the beginning. So, any questions, let me know, or we go back to where we should have started from before I started by throwing you in the deep waters.
Sorry, can I make a question?
Of course.
You said previously that in the energy market, the price that is paid today is for the energy that will be consumed in the future. Is it right?
Not necessarily. It's just the price that you see here.
Okay.
So it's here. I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor. I'm pointing at the day ahead here.
Okay.
So this is the day ahead market, what we see. I could pick here the intraday, for example.
Okay.
And the only country that does intraday auctions is right now is Switzerland here. Yes, so I could go to the continuous market, which you can see here a little bit. So it would be the continuous 60-day market. And here you can choose timings, for example, 60 minutes or 30 minutes intervals or 15-minute intervals for the countries that have them, and so on. But I didn't mean to interrupt your question. So maybe your question is broader.
Thank you. I was just wondering if these high prices could also be based on some expectation that in the future, due to new policies and all the effort that countries are making to reduce the emission, the use of energy will be higher than gas, and so it's something based on the expectation of a greater use in the future. So maybe in the market there is this feeling that the energy will be more profitable than gas in the future, and so prices are rising right now. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. As a way of thinking, it makes sense. There are limitations to depending on the type of energy you're talking about. So let me first of all say that this is a day-ahead market numbers. So what that means is that we trade the contracts today for delivery tomorrow. So and because electricity, you cannot really store electricity very easily. There's no point accumulating electricity. So you can essentially purchase electricity for tomorrow and you have to use it tomorrow. If you don't use it tomorrow, then there's no point purchasing it today. So that's a first thing to say. What you said about the future expectation is normally very true for most markets, really. And most markets that can allow accumulation of commodities. So for example, if you are, I don't know, if you're having, let's say, coal, coal, you can buy a lot of coal and accumulate it in stores inside your country, in warehouses, and keep it there for the whole winter. That's fine. It's not going to go off. Yeah, it's a resource that stays in its own right and doesn't cost so much to store. So if you thought that coal would be very expensive in 3 months, you would probably be buying a lot of coal now. Almost the same, but not as easy, happens with gas. So gas, again, if you think that gas will be very expensive in, I don't know, in 3 months' time, then you will start buying more gas today. The problem with gas is that, again, you can store, but you cannot store it so easily. Yeah, so it's not like coal that is a solid fuel that you just pile somewhere and you make a mountain of coal and that's easy. With gas, you need specific types of storage that can keep it there and not let it leak and all of that. So it's a little bit more tricky. You cannot have endless storage of gas. So I would say your thinking is completely correct, but it needs adjustment depending on the storage capability that you have for the specific resource you're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So any other questions before I take you to the beginning?
It sort of relates to something that you said back at the start.
Sure,
please, so we're talking about the speculation that gas prices will increase. Would you say that on the demand side, like the greater transition towards fixed tariffs rather than variable tariffs is creating a bubble that's forcing the prices up?
Can you say it again? Because I think I've missed you there somewhere. Say it again.
Yeah. So we're talking about the speculations causing gas prices to increase.
Sure.
So on the demand side of things, like as a utility provider, for example, I was working one last year and we saw a greater transition from our member base towards fixed tariffs rather than variable tariffs. So is that creating like a bit of a bubble in the pricing as well? Because you're basically locking people into a fixed tariff for 1 or 2 years. It's generally then higher than market price.
Right. Okay. So you see, depends on the season you're going to say that in. I mean, right now, most consumers are on fixed prices, which are way lower than what they should have been based on what the wholesale price is. Yeah, so because the wholesale price has gone crazy high suddenly, most consumers that have fixed their prices, for example, I fixed my price back in January. So the price I have fixed for is ridiculously low by comparison to, I mean, essentially my retailer might go bust because they're having to sell electricity to me in a price that is way cheaper than what they are paying to buy it. So already right now in the UK, for example, we have numerous suppliers that are facing financial difficulties and are about to go bankrupt. So it is a major danger right now for a few of the retailers, essentially companies that don't produce their own, but they have to purchase electricity and just retail it to final consumers. So I'm not sure if that's what you meant, though, because you meant probably the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, I was talking more sort of wholesale pricing, but yeah, it's an interesting time for the UK anyway in the energy market. But
yeah,
yeah, because I was just wondering like if that was the case, that if that was sort of like forcing prices up as well. But yeah, never mind.
It doesn't necessarily. No, it doesn't necessarily. I mean, it would be the retail price doesn't necessarily affect very fast. It's probably the opposite. The retail price that doesn't often interact very much with the wholesale price. The main reason, I don't know, and I don't know if that's what you meant. The main reason is that as everyone is on fixed tariffs, there is no liquidity in that sense. There's no fluidity in the market. So you miss the opportunities of, let's say, individual consumer behavior with their, switching on and off appliances affecting the actual price in the wholesale market. It could happen in theory, but not with the market structure as it is at the moment. There are very few consumers who are on variable tariffs and who could be able to really impact anything in the wholesale market. I think it's going to change, but it's, right now it's not a significant driver.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to get at. All right, cheers for that.
Okay, good. Okay. I don't know if you noticed, but while we're speaking, prices have changed. This is a live table, yeah, what I'm showing you here. Do you remember how high was the UK previously? It has gone down by 100. So pricing keeps changing as we go. Obviously, that reflects the fact that in the UK, as we go into the day, demand has been stabilized a little bit. But anyway, I don't want to keep you very much on that. There is a lot to be said here, and we will return, so not to worry about it. Shall I go back in the beginning, or do we have any other questions?
Sorry, before we begin, can we have some information on how the course will work? I mean, like the exam assignments, if all the lectures will be recorded, etc. Thank you.
Of course. I mean, that was part of my beginning, to be honest. I would go there anyway. So let me then go to the beginning, because what you asked is really part that we would be discussing about anyway today. So let me see if I can share. Can I share my other slides with you? So if I delete this and I go to here. Am I sharing slides with you now? Or not really?
No. Can't see anything, just a black screen.
Yes.
Can you see my slides now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, managed. Okay.
No.
No?
Oh, me no.
No, I
can't either. Not yet. Me neither.
This is interesting because some of you can and some of you cannot. So what's happening? I wonder why. If I stop it and do it again, let me see, what have I done? So if I try. Now, can you see anything?
No.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
How is that possible that some of you can't see them and some of you cannot? Okay.
I cannot actually.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So I think there is another way to share slides. Let me see if I can do this. If I try that, probably now you can all see them.
Yes.
Oh yes, now it works.
Yes.
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 Okay. Let me see if I can do a different format. Can you see me now inside the slides? It's a bit weird.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
That is quite weird. Okay, let me see if I can stop that. Oh God. Wait. How do I stop that thing? It's so bizarre. I wasn't expecting this to look like that. Okay, guys, I have no idea how to stop that. Let's go back there. Side by side, I think that's the correct way to do it. Can you see anything now?
No.
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 Yes.
Yes.
No.
So some of you still cannot do it. Cannot see anything. There's something very strange with Teams in the way it allows me to share stuff. So the problem persists. You can still not see it. You can still not see the slides. Some of you at least.
No.
No.
I can.
Okay, there is something then freaking me out for some of you. I don't know what it is. Let me try something else. I think now you will be able to see it, like all of you probably. No, is it?
No.
Oh God.
No.
Okay.
No.
If I try that, does that work for all of you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Now, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I have no idea why one thing works and the other doesn't work, but at least we know what works. Okay. So this is a start. Okay. So now I should say when I'm sharing my screen like that, the main problem I have is I cannot see what you guys are writing in the chat. So if you're writing stuff in the chat that you want me to see, then maybe don't. Maybe just switch on your mics and speak. Because when I do that, I can either see my slides or the chat, one of the two only. And I think if I try to see the chat, I have to switch off the slides. There's something quite weird happening here. So what I'd ask you to do is to please, if you have anything to say here, don't just type, just better switch on your microphones and talk. So let me get you then through this a little bit. And we'll have time to explain also, what the other things that colleagues have just mentioned a minute ago, of how is this model structures and so on. So really the beginning of all of this is how do we move inside this world of energy decarbonization and transitioning to net zero emissions? And we'll have a fair amount of technical discussions on, what kind of technologies are available, how they perform, how they can deliver this kind of decarbonization that we're looking for. We'll also have conversations about the kind of policies and market structures that could enable these technologies to become players in this system of decarbonization. Time trajectories, how this could look like in the near future, what we need to replace to move to a decarbonization, what is the carbonized present that we need to replace and how we can replace it. I will be insisting quite a lot with us understanding the status quo of energy. So with us getting a good feel of where things are with the current structures in energy. Because if we don't understand that, then we normally have no clue of how to replace what is there now with something else, which would emit nothing. So, and I find it's a typical challenge when people start entering this domain of decarbonization, that if you don't know how markets work and how energy supply works, then usually you end up with very weird assumptions over how renewables could deliver decarbonization. So this is why I'm quite keen for us to get that understanding, so we're able to move along with it and really talk about solutions that are realizable and not nonsensical. So let's move a little bit on that. Let's see a couple of things that we have at hand. So there's going to be, a few parts for us to discuss: conventional energy systems, clean fossil fuels, if that's really a thing, with a few question marks there from me. Wind energy, solar energy, all sorts of renewables, future energy systems, which are increasingly becoming less futuristic and much more energy systems of the present and the very near future, if I should add. We'll see also a few issues that are there and can really hinder things moving forward, energy security questions and so on. And we'll be seeing all of that through the prisms of technology, policy, and business. So there will be, like I said earlier, a fair amount of technological understanding that we need to catch up with. As I see, especially many of you don't come from any technological backgrounds. So I will be pushing you a little bit into getting your heads around what are the technology issues that we need to figure out. And I'm sure most of you will be a bit more versed with policy and maybe even business aspects from what I can see from your backgrounds. But all of these are kind of the lens through which we'll try to see what is happening in these markets. So let's crack on. Really, my aims for structuring this module are, for us to get us familiar with, like I said, broader energy issues, technology of electricity systems. We'll be talking a lot about electricity rather than other resources, but you'll see how that plays out. Basic assessments of renewable energy installations and big pictures for energy and electricity. I'm quite keen to get you into that because I have this feeling that, it's all of these new energy domains are really the big employers, the big and good employers of the present and the future. So these are areas which are growing in a very fast pace, and they do provide usually careers and jobs which are, I would argue, better than average. And they're, I would also argue, quite interesting. So I'm quite keen to get you into this sector and help you understand, what is it in there for you. And I'm always very happy when I see on LinkedIn some of you, because often I see the news on LinkedIn, some of you in the future, a few years down the line, moving into the energy sector and having your careers there. I always find it very, very inspiring and very exciting. So I hope that more of you will do that and will allow this sector to have a bit of visibility for you. So let's crack on with more. So somebody asked me about the marking assessment and all of that. So there isn't really a lot to say here, but maybe it is useful to clarify what the assessment structure would look like for us this year. So most important thing is there will be one written assignment, the deadline on the 10th of December. Oops, and I can see here that should have been 2021. I do apologize. I'll change that in the slides. So don't worry, you're not late. You still have until December this year to submit your coursework. And it will be a piece of work up to 3,000 words. I will give you a specific brief, a couple of pages of a brief with more thorough explanations over exactly what it is expected. In very quickly now, if I should mention, it is a piece of coursework where you will write about an energy plan for your own country, whatever country you choose. And for that country, you will need to select a specific renewable energy type and really work on it and make it grow in the country, in your country of choice. So we'll have a little bit of a strategy, a policy understanding of how you're moving from the status quo of that particular energy type in your country of choice to a new situation that would be, say in about 10 to 20 years, it will allow you a significant growth. So that could be that I'm choosing, for example, my home country, Greece, and I want to grow solar energy in Greece. So I'm going to say that solar energy in Greece today is, I don't know, maybe 10% or 15, whatever the metric you want to use for counting that. But I want it to be 50% by 2030 or 2040. So I will outline a plan that makes sense, of course, on how that growth would become possible and what kind of barriers will I need to go through, what kind of policies I need to break through that. Are there any incentives, any removal of these incentives that I need to go through and all of that. So it will be a country level analysis for a specific renewable energy type growth plan. So that's that's that. Have you got any questions for this part? I mean, I'm sure you might have, and we'll be discussing about it throughout, but in the first instance, is there something that, you know, sounds a bit weird to you?
So you're asking for a plan for a transition, let's say, transition to renewables.
Correct, yeah. It will be a specific one, so for a specific country and a specific type of renewable, to be able to limit it, because you only have 3,000 words, yeah, and it's one piece of coursework for one module. I don't expect you to write a dissertation on it. So we'll have to limit it as much as possible to make it sensible. But yeah, in broad terms, that is the plan.
We can choose whatever country in the world we prefer?
Sort of. So what I'll ask you to do is, as soon as you have selected a country, you will need to drop me a line, and I will need to approve of that country. Really, what that means is that I don't want you to end up doing the same country and the same type of renewable energy sector, all of you. So that is my main worry. So I will want to make sure that each one of you does a different country and a different energy type. So 2 of you or 3 of you can do the same country, but if that's the case, you will need to be doing different type of energy for that country. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, and because it's quite a few of you, of course, we will have plenty of you doing, you know, the same country. I don't doubt that. So what I'd say is, even though I haven't given you the coursework brief yet, I'm planning on doing this on Wednesday. Start thinking already if you have any specific country you want to work on, and any specific energy sector you want to work on, because you'll need to book that, because it will be a first come first served sort of approach. Whoever of you are here first that wants that kind of country and that, you know, say wind energy in Italy, that's, you know, whoever emails me first is going to get it. So it will be good to hear from you ASAP on that. So that's that. I mean, I'm hoping that by, by next Wednesday, once you have your coursework brief, and once I start hearing responses from you, you will get my confirmation very, very soon. So then you can start already working on your selections. And hopefully that should give you enough time until, 10th of December is plenty of time really to develop this work. So that's, in the first instance. And again, like I said, we will be discussing about your coursework throughout the next, the next month where this module runs. But if in the first instance now you hear something that you're wondering, how you should be able to run it or however, just let me know already now. I'd be happy to explain anything further. No, all sounds good. Oh, sorry. Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that when you mentioned that we need to talk about policies and barriers and limitations, that means that we should base our decision on the country also on the resources or information that we have about that specific country, or correct. Is it okay? Correct.
It's a combination of renewable energy resources and existing energy structures. Okay. So for example, if you were to think, let's imagine a country. Which country could be a good example? I'll take Greece again, just because it's my home. Even though I don't live in Greece for I don't know how long now, but I always like to use it as an example. So let's take Greece. Yeah. So Greece up to say 10 years ago was very heavily reliant on lignite. Lignite is a type of coal. We also call it brown coal, and that was the indigenous fuel in Greece. So reliance of electricity sector on coal was really enormous. If one were to write up such a type of a transition plan, we'd have to take this into account to think from what Greece would be transitioning to a new type of energy. And then you, of course, have to think, right, okay, let's say, for example, I want Greece to move to insane amounts of hydro. Well, Greece doesn't have a lot of hydro. It has a bit, but it doesn't have so much that you could really imagine Greece moving to 50% hydro. And it is not bound to have any more because there's not going to be so much rainfall predicted through climate change in Greece. It's probably going to be drier and drier as we go. So I'd say whatever plan we come along with has to take into account what is there right now and what is the potential for renewable energy sector. So for example, for Greece, you could probably say, I think solar has a lot of room to grow in Greece, or maybe wind, or something like that. But I think we'll have to keep it realistic. I mean, again, I don't expect you to have an analysis that is 100% perfect and scientifically sound, but it has to be sensible. That is what matters. There are all sorts of assumptions you will need to take and in order to proceed. But of course, with these assumptions, we should be able to make some good progress. So that is my plan there.
Yeah, I have one question about the assumptions. So for a country like the United States, you're going to have a lot more data and a lot more opportunity to crunch the numbers in Excel than in a country like Bolivia. So will you be a little more lenient if we choose a country that has just less data, less grid interconnectivity data, less financials for those companies? Will you be okay with us taking a little more liberal approach to the assumptions?
Right. Okay. So throughout, I will try to discourage you from picking countries that don't have available data online. I am not planning to stop you from doing it, but I will ask you to take responsibility for being able to access data and information from the country of choice. So if you look around on you, because for example, some of you might be from, if one of you is from Bolivia and has access to the Ministry of Energy in Bolivia, then maybe that's easy for you to do it. But if somebody doesn't, if I had to do a study in Bolivia right now, I probably would struggle a lot more than I would struggle to do it, for example, I don't know, for the United States, as you said before, or for the UK, where data is really abundantly available. So I would try to encourage you to pick countries for which you can actually find some adequate data.
And for the United States, can we go state by state, because there is a major difference between
the United States is not one country. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
It's many, in the same way that the European Union is not one country. Yeah. When it comes to energy and such stuff, yeah, I would totally encourage you to. I mean, let's face it. Some states they're not even one country themselves. They can be much more complicated internally. So yeah, by all means, state by state is the correct approach then.
Should we think about it as an academical approach, an academical paper, so an introduction, abstract, and so on, or no?
I see what you mean. You will be given into the brief the kind of structure I'm looking for. It will not be, strictly speaking, an academic paper. You will be trying to respond to specific questions as soon as possible, as early as possible inside the report. And I will try to discourage you from wasting word count for repetitive sections, as abstracts, as things like that. I would discourage you from doing that. But this is, in detail explained in the assignment brief that I will give you.
Okay, thank you.
The only academic thing that you will have there will be a requirement for a degree of robustness in what you do, in what you say, and very good referencing throughout. That will be the main thing I will be very demanding of in academic terms. So, if you have no more questions of all that, shall I say, So I see some questions in the chat. Are you guys happy that your questions have been answered so far? I see Samir there. Yeah. Okay. So if we were to move on, so I'm trying to think now. Do you normally do breaks, or how should we do this? Should we have a break now for the whole 3-hour session? Is that a good idea?
Yes.
Yeah. Anybody object to having a break now?
Yes, it's okay.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. Okay, so let's have then one break now before I take you to more energy things. Should we go for, what is it? Let's say one break for all the class. Shall we have it? I don't know. Is 20 minutes good for you?
Suits me.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you can have a bite and then come back, because I guess it's kind of lunchtime there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you can have a bite and then come back. We can continue. Okay. So I'll see you all in 20 minutes, thereabouts.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Hello, is everybody back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so ta-da, maybe we should start already then. So let me see. We're missing some people. We're missing about 10 people. But we'll start, and I'm sure they will join us. So, oh, not again. I guess you can not see what I'm doing.
No.
I can see.
This is so strange because it does show to me very nicely my slides, and it allows me to edit and it allows me to do anything. Okay, let me go to more traditional sharing. Okay, so can you all see my slides now?
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
Yes, I'm.
Good, 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 good. Okay, so I did notice a question in the chat. What was it? About the exam. Okay, so I think very few of you will sit an exam, and I should probably explain this a little bit more. So the vast majority of you will submit a report, and the report is about 3,000 words. The deadline on the 10th of December this year, in which you will write an energy transition plan for a specific type of renewable energy for a country of your choice. Now, what I meant to say is that obviously this is I would say the recommended way for you to go through this module. But there are other students who want to sit the exam and who have not managed to attend the classes. And for those students are allowed to go to the exams and sit an actual exam. So they will go in February, or I think it's end of January, I don't remember the exact time. And they will be able to sit an exam, which is a multiple choice plus some questions, plus some normally written questions. So there are these two options for evaluation, for assessment in this module. Which ones you will choose? I mean, obviously, like I said, I expect most of you to do the report. So that's that. So there will be an exam, but like I said, I don't think it's relevant. It's very relevant for people who attend this module. It might become relevant if your report is not good enough. So if you fail your report, or if you don't do well enough, if you're not happy with your mark and you want to have an opportunity for a second marking, maybe the exam would be your option as well. But yeah, these are the two options really. But like I said, I think now for the immediate future, the report is going to be the one we will deal with. And on Wednesday, I will give you the brief, yeah. And the slides, yes, I will share the slides, yes. I haven't done it yet, simply because I didn't have time, but I will do it, yeah. Because I wanted to correct the mistake I had earlier, you know, the 2020, I want to make it 2021 and then share them with you. So I will share them. I think there's somebody, Rebecca, that asked for that. Okay, so should I continue then with the slides now as we are? So can you all see my slides talking about primary and secondary energy supply?
Yeah, I can.
Hopefully, yes. Okay, good. So let me get you a little bit through that. I mean, these are all introductory issues with energy. and we'll carry on and keep building a little bit your knowledge in these domains. So first thing to point out is that we have what is called, primary energy supply and secondary energy supply. Typically, primary energy supply is what, the energy as we find it in nature. So that would be things like, crude oil as we drill for it, and gas, and what we know as natural gas, by the way, and coal or uranium or renewable energy sources. So that's not the electricity they produce here. That's the wind, the resource, the wind or the solar radiation, not the electricity, because electricity is a different thing. So these are all primary energy sources. And then there are the secondary energy sources, which typically are things like, what we process, what we get out as a product from processing primary energy sources. So, for example, when we process crude oil in a refinery, we will get refinery products. Okay, it will be all sorts of petrol, diesel, kerosene, or whatever else you get out of a refinery. There's a good range of products that you will get. There's also electricity. When we, for example, use the renewable energy sources to produce electricity with wind turbines, so we convert wind to wind energy to electricity, essentially. So this is the difference between primary and energy and secondary energy supply. And like I said, this is not necessarily a big issue. It's just that I'm mentioning it here because you will be seeing this terminology a lot in the literature, in reports, whatever you're reading. It's quite important for you to have an understanding of what these things are. So that's what they refer to. Okay. So that's for that. Let me move on. So efficiency factors. Now, that brings us to conversions. So you might be converting one type of energy to another, and all of these conversions typically have a specific efficiency, a specific effectiveness in this conversion, that we need to factor in. So typically we don't manage to make perfect conversions. So, for example, if you're converting, say, solar radiation to electricity, you do this with solar panels, with PV panels, and the solar radiation falls onto a panel, and you harvest electricity at the end of the panel. Now, what is important is that, do we actually manage to get all the energy that falls into that panel and make it electricity? The truth is that we don't. It doesn't happen this way. We have a certain amount of loss, a certain amount of reflection of radiation back, a certain amount of energy is converted to heat, and so on. So not all of it becomes electricity. And the same happens with all sorts of energy conversions. So, for example, when we burn coal in a coal-fired power station to produce electricity, only a certain amount of that energy, that is the chemical energy that is inside coal and is released when we burn it, only a certain amount of that energy is eventually converted to electricity. The rest of it is gone. We don't manage to actually do something with it. So if I were to ask you, just out of curiosity, from your understanding of these things, what is the efficiency factor? How efficient is a coal-fired power station, for example? Would you know? Roughly?
I think 70 or 80%.
Okay. Somebody else? Thank you.
I think like 30%.
How much?
30.
30, okay. Others?
Around 40-50%. 40-50%.
Okay. So those of you that went for around, between 30 and 40, or even, 50, we're not really doing very much, but 40, high 40s, close to 50 is achievable at high-end coal-fired power stations. But these are kind of high-end, So normally you're looking at 40 or even below for most coal-fired power stations. If we look at a different technology, for, nuclear, what kind of efficiency we manage?
30%.
30.
Yes.
Yeah. Others?
I would say like 70, 80, higher.
Okay.
Me too, like 80.
Okay. You know, the first one was correct. It's around 30. It's very rarely above 35 with nuclear. So if I pick another one, let me think of another one just to see a bit of a difference here. Hydro.
$20.
Okay. Others?
5.
I agree.
How much? How much?
5.
Others?
Can you repeat the questions, please?
If I can write these questions, I can try. So, let me see. Can you still see my screen, or do you see my face now?
We can see both.
You can see both. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. We're managing that. Okay. Okay. That's good. So the question is, what is the efficiency factor of hydropower? It's a rough question. Yeah? I mean, of course, it varies between.
I would say we are 90 or even more.
Yeah, correct. It can easily be 90. Yeah. So you would easily expect around 90% for hydro, and you would expect something around 30 to 40 for coal or nuclear. These are your standard figures there. Let's forget a little bit about hydro. We'll get back to that later. And let's think for a minute what's happening with coal and nuclear that we mentioned before. So these are very similar, and they're similar because they're based on the same mechanical process. So the conversion cycle is pretty much the same when it comes to nuclear and coal. The similarities in the way we produce that energy. Yes. So what do we do normally is that we use a source of heat. So nuclear energy and coal's chemical energy are essentially used as sources of heat. So we use them to heat water to a separate supercritical temperature when we make steam. And that steam then should be pressurized and powerful enough to be able to run a turbine, a steam turbine. But it's the same process. It's just a heating thing. What happens before that heating thing, you know, that before the steam production, so how we produce that heat, in reality is almost irrelevant. It's the steam cycle that has the efficiency. So however you produce that steam is almost the same. So if I give you one last one for this one, for the kind of conversion efficiencies. So how about your car? Do most of you drive a normal car? What is the efficiency of that engine? You put petrol in and it converts the petrol to motion and your car moves. What is the conversion we get there? What's the efficiency there? Come on, nobody?
Like 50, 60%.
56 in the car, okay. Anybody else? Don't be shy, come on, you all have cars.
30.
How efficient is your car?
30, 35%.
20 at most. Yeah, around 20. It's really rubbish. Even if your car is very, very efficient and very, I don't know, kind of clean or whatever, its fuel efficiency is really rubbish. And that's inherent to the type of engines we have. So all of our petrol and diesel engines, they're not particularly efficient machines. That's one thing. The second thing is that the way we operate them is extremely challenging for them to be efficient. Yeah. So you can imagine, any engine has an optimal operation level. So for example, for your car, if you were to think of it in terms of RPMs, yeah, in the rounds per minute, there's a specific level of RPMs that your car is the most efficient running. But in reality, when you drive your car, you accelerate, you decelerate, you change gears. Typically, you will be moving across that range. So you're very often outside of the optimal range. So these engines, if they were to be operated at the optimal range, they would probably be around 30 to 40%. But because we typically use them all across the board, the car's operation overall tends to be a lot lower than the optimal. So it's usually around 20%. If everything goes well, it's around 20%. So that's a little bit on efficiencies. Now, one further question is, for us to understand a little bit more about these efficiencies, what happens to the rest of that energy? So the fuel has a certain amount of chemical energy, and we burn that fuel in a process that we call combustion, which chemically essentially is we take carbonated structures and hydrogen structures that are inside the fuel, and we join them up with oxygen. So whenever you chemically join something with oxygen, that would be leading to what we call a combustion. Yeah. So we combust the fuel, and that releases a lot of heat. And out of that heat, we manage to convert some of it to electricity, some of it to motion energy for the car. What happens to the rest of it? Any guesses?
It goes into the atmosphere?
Correct. We just release it, yeah? We just release it to the environment. So the rest of the heat is released on the environment. For example, your car will have a refrigerating unit. We'll have a system that is there to be able to abstract heat from the engine. That is all of this excess heat. That is the heat that was not converted to motion. So all of that heat needs to be abstracted from the engine, because if it keeps accumulating on the engine, your engine is going to explode. It's going to melt. You cannot keep collecting that heat there. It needs to come out of the engine and be released to the environment. And that depends, a lot on if you have a liquid-cooled engine. Most engines are liquid-cooled, and then, of course, you have the refrigerating unit in front of your car, which takes fresh air as the car moves and reduces the temperature even further, and so on. Yeah. Similar things happen to power stations. So we have, for example, a coal-fired power station or a nuclear power station. It's very similar. You will convert, like we said, around 30 to 40% of the heat that we produced to electricity. And then there is almost 2/3 of that energy need to be released to the environment. They cannot stay in the power station because they will overheat the power station. So we need to find ways to quickly and efficiently move them outside to the natural environment. That's not very easy. Yeah, that's quite a challenge. It's a challenge for which we have enormous cooling systems in these power stations. And we often need to use some medium, some natural resource that will be capable of taking out that heat of the power station. So for example, most power stations are built next to what kind of natural environment do you put them?
Nuclear plants, for example, close to lakes or rivers.
Correct. So most nuclear plants will be next to lakes, will be next to rivers, will be next to the seaside. Yeah. So they will be next to significant bodies of water. They will need a significant body of water because it is that water that we will run through the power station to allow it to take some of the heat out of the power station. That's what we normally use. Yeah. It's one of the interesting characteristics there that we need. There's this vulnerability there in these systems, that we need them to be close to a body of water. And that is the way that these systems will operate, but it's also a danger for these systems, yeah, because they need to be next to water that can flood at any time. So we will talk about these types of vulnerabilities later on. They're quite significant for fossil fuel based systems and nuclear ones. Nuclear, I would say even more. Okay, so then for our understanding, let's take a look at the slides then. So we have these things that are about, the thermodynamic efficiency. So how much of this thermal energy that the fuels release do we convert to electricity? And there's also another thing, which is how much of the renewable energy source we convert to electricity. So some of you might have heard the phrase, when somebody wants to have something bad to say about renewable energy sources, people often say that, yeah, but they're not very efficient. They say, yeah, solar panels are not very efficient, or wind turbines are not very efficient. Have you heard this term? Have you heard that being said?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Do you know what people mean?
I think they refer to the efficiency factor.
Mm-hmm. So how much energy from the wind's energy or the sun's radiation we manage to convert to actual electricity?
I think it is between 10 and 20%. The efficiency.
Yeah, it can be quite low. It's true. I mean, when it comes to solar panels, this is often quite low. It can be something like, say, roughly 15%, 20, maybe. There are some commercial panels now that go to 22, 24%, something like that. But above that, it doesn't exist at a commercial scale. For wind energy, it can be a little bit better. It can be 25 to 35. For offshore wind, it can be even better than that. It can be 40%. So, but still, it's not huge. The important question here is that doesn't compare very badly with fossil fuels. So it's a false assumption that fossil fuels are 100% efficient. Yeah, of course they're not. They're nowhere near that. They're, like we said, they're about 30 to 40%. So that's one thing, that the comparison is not really that bad. And the other thing is, with fossil fuels, we actually pay for the resource. Yeah? Coal has a price. Gas has a price. Oil has a price. We pay for that resource. We pay for the primary energy that we put into the power station. So, of course, it's really, really important that we convert as much as possible of that primary energy resource to electricity. But with wind, we don't pay for the wind. The wind is free. We don't pay for the sun. The sun is free. That doesn't have a price. So the solar radiation comes down on the panel. Of course, we have an incentive to want to produce as much electricity as possible from every single panel or from every single wind turbine, surely. But we don't have running costs based on fuel use on these supply systems. So if the panel itself makes sense financially, then we have more panels. That's it. We have more wind turbines. So the urgency for efficiency is not as high. That's what I would say there. Yeah. It matters, but it's not as important as it would be with fossil fuels. Is that clear? Does that make sense to you? Or am I confusing you here?
Clear.
Yeah, all good. Okay. Anybody has questions, just stop me and I'll be happy to explain more. So let's move a little bit further down. So I'll show you a few pictures, where I'll try to explain a little bit what's happening globally with energy balances. And that's quite important because it helps us understand how the world has been shaped, really has been shaped by fossil fuels and by energy overall. So energy goes a little bit beyond, energy itself is a bit of a bigger deal. It shapes world trade, it shapes geopolitics, it shapes how we have power dynamics between countries and so on. So I'll be trying to show you a little bit how these things really exist in the world. So in terms of, here just see, a little bit of a consumption dynamics in a few different in regions, really. So that's dividing the world between OECD and non-OECD countries. OECD is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. So these are often seen as the rich countries of the world. So there's the OECD and the non-OECD countries. importantly here is to see a little bit what's happening with consumption between these two blocks and how this has evolved in the past and how this is looking like in the future. So we do see some growth in energy consumption in the OECD countries, but if you notice, this is a very modest expected growth. You know, there's nothing too significant happening there. And if you see, you know, the equivalent in non-OECD countries, this is growing rapidly. Why is this happening? Why is this difference, you reckon?
Part of it's population growth. In OECD countries, population growth is starting to level off, whereas in a continent like Latin America, you're going to have very, very rapid population growth in the coming century. Correct.
So one thing is population growth. The other thing is economic growth that is linked to it, obviously. So typically you have economies which are growing and they're bringing with them significant energy demand. And population growth, of course, which is mostly expected, you know, in places outside of the OECD. So that's the primary drivers: population and economic growth that are linked to energy demand. At this moment, we haven't yet managed to, you know, very much, let's say, disconnect as efficiently as we would have liked economic growth from energy demand growth. These are linked to some extent. I mean, not for every country, but for many countries, they're very much linked. So let's see a little bit more on that. Energy consumption per capita per region for 2020. Maybe I should say, I forgot to mention, pretty much, you know, many of the graphs I use here, they're really directly accessible from BP Energy Outlook, World Energy Outlook. I can share the document with you. It's very easily, it's freely available anywhere on the internet. It's not anything secret or anything that you cannot access. So I just unashamedly use graphs that they have already available in there, because they're quite good in helping us, you know, see a little bit of the bigger picture in this kind of energy resource politics. They're not the only resource that there is available for these data. There are many others. Just I find their graphs a little bit prettier than others. That's why I use those. But yeah, just because I don't have citations in every page, this is why I'm mentioning it now for you. So let's walk a little bit through this one that you see here. So this is per region. So every line is a region, and you see the development of energy consumption per person, per capita, per region. Yeah. So tell me what you see. Can be some common threads you see here, if you see anything. Anything of interest?
There is a decrease in 2020 in almost all regions.
Almost all regions had a little bit of a decline in 2020. Why was that? You might know.
COVID.
COVID hit us all, yeah, correct. Some regions more than others in that period, but definitely, I mean, if you see Asia Pacific region, the yellow line had almost no impact. Or equally, Africa had almost no impact. But other countries, I don't know, like North America, for example, had a very significant impact. South and Central America had a significant impact. Europe as well, yeah. So it depends on where you look at. You'll see different levels of impact. So that's one thing. What happened with COVID in 2020? Most regions had a significant reduction in the last year. What else do we see?
Maybe North America and Europe. Sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
North America and then Europe are on a declining pace, while on the other hand, I don't know, Asia and Pacific are slowly increasing. If I mean we look at the long term and not only in last years.
Correct. So there is a long-term decline in North America. Pretty much the same is happening in Europe. So you have certain regions which are going down, other regions which are going up. So I'm seeing the yellow line, Asia Pacific, is climbing gradually. I'm seeing Middle East is climbing gradually as a long-term trend. Yeah. The other thing you see, obviously, is that the North American line is way above any other part of the world. Yeah. So that means that energy per capita consumption in North America is way higher than the other parts of the world. So the average American, the average Canadian, or even Mexican, because that's still North America, consumes more energy, a lot more energy than anybody else in the world. Yes, almost twice than the average European would consume. So that's quite an interesting observation if you pay attention to that. Why is that the case? Why does the average American consume about twice the energy of the average European? Any thoughts?
Because of the population?
Say it again?
Because of the population?
What does it mean?
How we can say about the demand and supply and about the population of the country, I mean. So when the
this is per capita. This is per person. It's not for the total population.
Yeah, this is per capita. So yeah, you're right. Sorry.
Could it be related with lifestyle?
Say again?
Could it be related with lifestyle of a single person?
Yeah. So let me say here, when we say energy consumption per capita, just to be clear, that is the whole of national energy consumption. So it's not the household's energy consumption. I don't know if you understand that, yes? So it's not the energy that is consumed in a household necessarily. It is that plus all the energy in the country. So all the factories, all the buildings, all the cars, everything that's happening in the country, divided by the population of the country. Yeah, so it's not just the household's consumption.
Okay, I mean, it can't explain all of it, but definitely transport has to play a role because in the United States, we don't have, cities connected as well as in Europe with public transport. So we fly a lot and we drive, obviously, suburban America, you have to have a car to access the city to commute. So transport has got to play a role here, but I don't think it can explain fully this massive differential.
Yeah, correct. Yes, so transport is a huge part, and all levels of transport, including aviation and road transport, including as well. I would say road transport. It's not just there is more of it; it's also that it's very much less efficient than you would say it in Europe. The kind of prevalence of very large vehicles in the US that many of them don't exist, or then don't exist at that kind of proliferation in Europe, has a role in that. So that's another part of it. But yeah, besides transport, what else would you imagine is the case?
A higher number of industries and firms, maybe.
There's a little bit of more industry in the US, that's true. Why is that the case? Why does the US might have more industry than some parts of Europe?
Because of the non-nuclear reactors, or because they don't use the renewable energies, same as Europe? Based on that, you said, I think.
No, you see, even if they were using nuclear or renewable energy or whatever, that would still count here, because even if a country relied completely on renewable energy, but they would use a lot of it, you would still see them having a very high share here. So this is not clean energy, it's all energy.
So probably because there is a high demand in the industry, like steel, chemistry industry in the US.
Mm-hmm. So there's often, more, I would say, I don't want to be very blunt and say, that there is more energy development, more industrial development in the US, but overall, the US industrial sector is in higher activity level than the European one. And the reason for that is low energy prices. So energy prices in Europe overall are way, way higher than energy prices in the US, which means that if you could choose, I mean, all things equal, if you could choose where to put your energy intensive industry between the US and Europe, you would go to the US easily. There would be no question, yeah, because energy prices would be significantly lower. So it means that if your end product relies a lot on consuming a lot of energy to be produced, then probably you can produce it a lot more cheaply in the US than in Europe. So that's a significant part to think of. I mean, of course, like I said, all things equal, yeah, because then there are trade barriers and whether you can take those goods and move them to wherever you need to sell them to. So it's not like every industry needs to move to the US. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. So that's the industry part that invites some energy intensive industries in the US and also to other parts of the world, yeah, not just the US, a lot more to China, for example. There's also this issue about how much energy the average household consumes. So it's not just everything else; it is the households as well. So my average experience from most American houses I have been is that they're very spacious, they're very large in terms of square meterage, very poor in terms of energy efficiency and insulation. And I say this as somebody who lives in the UK, because our houses here are really rubbish in the UK in terms of insulation. They're not good at all. But still, I thought American houses that were even worse, the ones I've seen. And there's a lot of oversized appliances, oversized air conditioning, oversized heating systems that typically would consume a lot of energy as well, a lot more energy than you would imagine otherwise. So it is the household as well is a factor. So yeah, these are the main reasons why you see a lot more energy consumption per average, per capita in the US than in Europe. There's a number of factors doing it, not just one or two. So that's that for us in that phase. Any questions so far before I move you to the next slides?
Why there is a decline in CIS countries in the beginning of 90s?
So the CIS countries, I'm trying to recall exactly what the initial means. So it's the Commonwealth of Independent States, I think, probably. The CIS countries typically are the countries which were previously known as the USSR. Mm-hmm. So in the 90s, there was a collapse of their economies. And lots of their industries needed to go through a complete restructuring, often a complete shutdown and really never opening again. So that is what has happened in that period. It was that phase where industries were shutting down, many of them never opening again, or those that opened again, opened through a lot of renovation and they were much more efficient. The previous level of efficiency, the USSR countries were never very famous for efficiency, for energy efficiency or resource efficiency or anything like that. They were never particularly good at that. It was usually quantity of production that mattered a lot more. So they weren't necessarily running their most efficient possible. When the regimes collapsed and they had to open again, but this time being exposed to worldwide markets, they couldn't operate like that anymore. So it wasn't economical to operate them. So that's why we saw a lot of economic activity decline in that period. They weren't competitive as industries anymore. Or they had to reduce their scale quite significantly. So that's why you see this very dramatic drop in that period. Does it make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other questions to this end? No? Okay. So let me move you to a couple more slides I want to show you. So these are, I'm taking here a few of the normal, the most proliferate, fuels that we have around the world and contrasting, side by side production and consumption by region. The reason here is to understand a little bit what kind of flows are possible and are happening really. So this is oil, that's crude oil, yeah, that's not refinery products, that's crude oil. And I'm showing you a little bit what's happening in production by region. Take a look on the left side, compare it with the right side. Give me a little bit of a hint of your observations. You will see again a decline the last year, but as you know, we discussed already, that's COVID related. But what else do you see?
In my opinion, in most cases, the countries that produce the most consume the less.
Okay, so there is an imbalance between production and consumption.
Yeah, like Middle East, Asia Pacific, the light blue, Europe.
Who is the main producer? Which are the regions that are big producers?
Big producer, Middle East and North America. But well, North America is quite equal, producing and consuming. But Asia Pacific produces less, like 3 times less than what this country consumes. And the opposite is the Middle East.
Yeah, so Middle East produces an enormous amount and obviously consumes a lot less than that. And Asia Pacific is the other way around. Seems to be producing a lot less than it consumes. The US is similar, production and consumption. Europe produces a lot less than it consumes. And you possibly also see Africa producing more than it consumes. So what's happening there? What does that lead us to believe that what's happening? There's an international oil trade, obviously, yeah? So oil is moving around the world quite a lot. There's a lot of oil flows, as you probably knew already, from Middle East, from Africa, predominantly these countries, producing a lot of oil, which they then sell to areas of the world which have a very high demand and no production of oil. So that's Asia Pacific, Europe, and some other parts. Now, why does that matter? I mean, obviously, oil travels a lot. And how do we travel oil? How do we transport oil around the world? What are the main means we have for that?
Ships. Pipelines.
So oil tankers and pipelines, these are the two main things that the two main means of oil transport. And both are very much available, but if you don't have any connections over land or very near sea distance, typically you will have oil tankers. And from where we are at the moment with the experience we have in oil markets, we know that oil is a very liquid resource. So there is a lot of flexibility in how markets operate with tankers and how oil is being transported around the world. So it doesn't matter if regions are close or very far. Oil tankers do a relatively efficient job in transporting the resource anywhere around the world. There's a very flexible market in that sense, which doesn't allow for insane price differentials between regions. Wherever there is demand, oil will normally flow to there, even if there is no chance to have easily connected pipelines for that. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I'm mentioning it here. It is self-evident, obviously. I mean, for anyone who has a look, who takes a look in the oil markets, that would be self-evident. But it is very different from other resources. Yes, so that's why I'm mentioning it here. Any other observations here? Anything you want to mention or to ask?
If I see right, the production is almost always lower than the consumption.
Sorry, can you say this again? I'm not sure I followed. Can you say it again?
Yeah, like in 1995, the production was below the little black line of 70. And in 95, the consumption was higher than the black line of 70. So I don't know if it's a graph representation issue.
Which region are you talking about? Sorry,
not a region in particular, but
which region?
No one in particular, but all the whole production and the whole consumption in the world.
You mean in 1995, it appears that there was lower production than consumption?
Yeah.
And okay. So
also
it makes you wonder
the last years.
What's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I should say these are snapshots of annual situations. In oil, in particular in oil, we have two things which we call, like oil is, first of all, very easily stored. So you have very high quantities of oil which are stored or in transit. So these are the two things that can cause these discrepancies, these small gaps that you see here. So if you have, for example, a significant number of oil tankers which are not assigned for specific regions yet in a certain year, this can cause this kind of gap. Or if you have oil that is stored or is under trade and the contracts are not resolved yet, this can happen as well. So such gaps can usually be explained statistically by how you classify certain parts of the resource. That is the reason. So it can be, for example, that a country consumes more oil that has just arrived, but it doesn't count for production for the same year. It might count for production on the next year, or it counted for production of the previous year, or whatever of that sort.
Clear. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's more of an accounting problem, I would say, than anything else. But yeah, good observation, nevertheless. You can see it also in the last year, if you see that there is more consumption again than production. You see the peak, 2019.
Yes.
It's a very similar situation. Any other questions on this one? No? Okay. Let's move to the next one. Well, about that. Sorry.
Yeah. It's almost me. Sorry. Maybe I expected the curves in the the last year in 2020. I maybe expected the decline to be different, both comparing production to consumption and also comparing countries or regions. Like it seems like all the production reduced in a similar way all around the world, and all the consumption slowed in a similar way all around the world.
I see what you mean. Yeah, no, it happens. I mean, it's a little bit confusing with these graphs because depending on how you put every country above each other, visually it can be a bit confusing. So as you see, things are falling a little bit faster when you're up at the top. But that is because you see an accumulated drop. Yeah, so there's a drop, a bit of drop here, a bit of drop here, a bit of drop here, and gradually you keep accumulating drops. Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. But there's no one country that crashes like the production.
Oil especially not, no, because I would say it's also in the nature of oil production and consumption that you wouldn't expect to see that kind of differentials. But it's a pretty steep decline. I mean, for many countries, I mean, I'm looking particularly at the consumption part. It has been quite a steep decline.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So let's move on to the next one. That is gas. So with gas, it's a very similar situation. Production on the left, consumption on the right. In the first instance, what is the main difference you see between the picture here for gas and the picture we saw before with oil? That's oil, that's gas. What's one of the main differences you see?
The main producers are different, like regions. I guess North America is the biggest one.
So different regions do differently when it comes to gas production and oil production. That's one thing, yes.
There is more balance.
There's a lot better balance left and right. Yeah, gas is way more balanced left and right. Another important one. It links to what I was telling you previously about oil. The point I was trying to make was that when it comes to oil, you normally, oil flows quite easily between countries, between producing and consuming countries. When it comes to gas, things are a bit more balanced here. Why is that the case?
Because you can transport it with the pipelines.
It's a little bit more difficult to transport gas. Yeah, that is the region. That is really. I mean, how would you transport gas? What is the way?
Yeah, with pipelines.
Predominantly with pipelines. What else?
Both.
With what?
With ships.
Correct. Yeah, there are what we call LNG tankers. Yeah, so these are the liquefied natural gas tankers. Why do we call them liquefied?
Because you supercool it to put it into liquid forms, then you can transport it more efficiently.
Correct. So what essentially you try to do there is you pressurize gas, because you want to have as much gas as possible in these tankers. So because gas is gas, is in gas form, you pressurize it as much as possible. But there is a point that the gas, when it's overpressurized, it turns to liquid, and of course it cools down at the same time. So its density increases. It turns to a frozen kind of gas. I don't remember the exact temperature. It goes down to, depends on the pressure, and it's in liquid form. So that's at that point liquefied gas. Once it's released again back to atmospheric or nearly atmospheric pressure, it becomes a gas again. But to transport it in the most efficient way, you need to liquefy it. So that's what the LNG tankers do. They're not as prolific as oil tankers, but they do exist, and they do. It's a tanker segment that is growing. So there are more orders for them. There seems to be a lot more demand for them as we go. So that means that for countries which are not necessarily linked with land borders, or they're not near enough to have pipelines connecting them, transport of gas is possible, but it's not as easy. So that's why you see a better balance between left and right here, with the resources being used regionally a lot more. They're used in the region that they're actually being produced at. Does it make sense? Or am I confusing you?
Makes sense.
Yeah, okay. Any questions on the graph you see in front of you? Did you know that North America is the world's biggest gas producer?
What?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. Did you know that North America is the world's largest gas producer?
No.
They use that way of fracking, something like that, frack production.
Yeah. If you see, and I wanted to ask you this question before. So you see, something is happening around 2010 in North America, and gas production starts climbing. Yeah. And if you see, if I move you to the previous slide with oil, it's a very similar picture. Yeah, again, at about 2010, production starts climbing. It's quite interesting. So what was that? Maybe you want to say, the person who spoke last. Somebody started saying, what is the reason for that?
The fracking production.
Yes, correct. That is hydraulic fracturing. So that's essentially a drilling technique for fossil fuel resources that allows exploitation of resources that we previously thought was not possible. So we knew that there was gas and oil in porous rocks, but we didn't have very good ways of taking that gas and that oil out. And that's what hydraulic fracturing does. It's a technology that has been developed in the US, and pretty much really the only region in the world where we have an excessive use of that technology is the US. There hasn't been a lot of that technology being deployed in many other parts of the world. But having deployed the technology in the US, I mean, other than an abundance of environmental problems that it has caused, it has also caused a significant growth in production. So that's both for oil and gas. Essentially, most of the drilling has been happening for the purpose of finding oil, because oil has always been a much easier to trade commodity. But many wells were delivering more gas than oil, really. So that gas had to be done something as well with. So we had a lot of gas production as well as a byproduct, really, of oil in the US. So that's the main picture here. That's what caused the American growth in these resources. Is that clear? I mean, does it make sense for all of you?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, should I move to the next one, or do you have any questions for here?
Okay.
Yeah, all good. Moving on to the next one. So that's coal. So with coal, what is your main observation? Yeah, so you saw the previous graphs. What's happening here with coal? What is very different with coal?
It's all about Asia and Pacific area. All the
First of
production,
all, it's all about Asia Pacific, correct? That's a good observation. What else?
All other countries decrease the production and consumption of coal.
Correct. Every other region decreases gradually production and consumption of coal. Asia Pacific, yeah, it's not exactly growing it very fast anymore, but it's not really declining either. It has had a significant, a steep rise in both production and consumption in the previous years. This hasn't started coming down significantly yet. So that's mainly driven by countries like China, like Indonesia, and India. But it is a trend in these regions that coal has been the name of the game for a long time. What else do you observe comparatively between production and consumption in relation to other graphs we saw?
It seems very localized, as if transport is very difficult as well.
Yeah, so coal is coal is not particularly hard to transport with normal container ships or normally coal tankers, not tankers really, but anyway, they're coal ships. You can actually transport coal relatively efficiently, but it is a resource that per unit, per weight unit, by per volume, doesn't have a high enough price. Yeah, so its price is not very high to justify transportation costs. So typically, you end up in situations where transportation adds, even though it's not that expensive, it ends up adding a significant premium on the market price of the commodity. So that's why it's not particularly a particularly good idea to transport a lot of coal to very large distances. The other thing is that there is an abundance of coal pretty much everywhere. There is coal in every country. Most countries have a bit of coal, wherever you look at. So it's not like, for example, with oil, we know that it's very hard to find oil in certain parts of the world. So there is no choice. If you need to use oil, you will have to import it. With coal, it's more likely that if you search hard enough, you should be able to find some coal and you should be able to dig and get it out. And that's what most countries have done in the past. They have used indigenous resources. Typically, the reason for using coal in most countries has been that they actually had it. It's not such a great fuel. You use it because you have it. So that's another reason for that. The other is that because there's also more reasons for this kind of interesting picture with coal. You see some trade of coal happening, and that is really down to one reason, and that is coal quality. So certain types of coal, they're not in abundance. So if you're looking for very high thermal value coal, like for example, when we're talking about coking coal or thermite or things like that, these coals need to be sourced from very certain countries. So for example, Australia has some of the world's best coking coal. Coking coal, I don't know, do you know what coking coal is, or am I just going on a tandem here?
No.
No, okay, so most coal, I mean, there are numerous types of coal around the world. Most of the coal economists tend to distinguish them in two very broad categories. One is what we call the thermal coal, and the other is the coking coal. So thermal coal is the one we use for energy production. So we burn it in power stations for electricity production. And the other one is the coking coal, and the coking coal we use for coking processes, which essentially is steel production. So we produce steel, the metal, essentially by combining coking coal with iron ore in very high temperature furnaces. So that's the main steel production method. So it's highly carbonated type of coal with very few impurities in it. That's the type of raw material you need for steel production. You wouldn't be able to do that with bad quality, with low quality coal. So whereas the opposite is the case for electricity generation, you can produce electricity with any rubbish coal you can find, which is why many countries rely on their indigenous coal for electricity production, even if that coal is completely of rubbish quality. That's why you have brown coal and lignite, often with very, very low calorific value, very low energy content in the fuel, simply because you're just going to burn more of it. Even though that means excessively high amounts of emissions. Yeah, that's not a good thing. It's a bad thing overall in terms of climate change and air pollution and all of that. But if a country values more their energy independence, they will normally use as much coal as they can from their own indigenous resources, even if quality is very, very bad. So any questions to that point? All good so far, all clear so far? Yeah, okay. So let's then move quickly. We'll have a few more minutes to just review a little bit the situation here with the international scene, and then we'll probably bring this to an end and carry on the next time. So that is, moving on to electricity, since we spoke a little bit about it. That's a bit of a, the kind of balances between electricity production from different sources by region. So you'll see a little bit of what's happening here, and there are quite interesting things going on in depending on the region you are at. What I meant to say is that before I show you this one, let me just see. Yeah, I meant to show you this graph a little bit. So one important bit here, I'll return the previous one a bit later. So one important thing for us to take a look at here is the issue about electricity becoming a more and more significant part of the bigger picture of energy. So what I'm trying to say with that is that more and more often we convert various processes of what we do around the world from primary energy to electricity. So let me explain this a little bit more. So typically, if you were, some years ago, if you wanted to, I don't know, say heat your house, the only source would be an oil boiler. You'd be burning oil in a boiler that would be producing hot water, and you would be heating your house with it. Gradually, we moved into, because oil was very polluting, we moved to natural gas. So most households in Europe would be using natural gas. And gradually, we're also moving to direct electricity use, and that is by using, maybe you have heard, heat pumps. Does any of you have a heat pump in your house for heating purposes? No? Do you know what I'm talking about? Or am I confusing you? Hello?
I have no idea what that is. Heat pump?
Idea what a heat pump is? Yeah, okay. Okay, so does anybody know what a heat pump is? No.
Nope.
Okay,
No.
okay. Nothing to be ashamed of. I just need to know what you don't know, so I'll explain it, okay? Right. Okay, so do you have, I mean, maybe some of you have air conditioning at your house, or but I'm sure you've seen air conditioning units somewhere. Are you more familiar with that?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, so that is maybe the versions you've seen were devices which have an external unit and an internal unit inside the property, and it blows normally cool air in summer. Is this what you've seen?
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Okay, so and I'm sure you all have it in your cars. Yeah, you have air conditioning in your car. So that is a heat pump. Yeah, the way this works is what we call a heat pump. A heat pump. I will not explain the exact process that runs in a heat pump, but typically is a device that uses electricity and can produce heating or cooling in a very efficient way, in a ridiculously efficient way. And it does that by exploiting the very low temperature of certain gases at which they boil, and then it makes them boil inside the heat pump, and then expands them outside to produce cooling or subtracting to produce heating. I don't mean to get you into that because that's very engineering hardcore, and none of you will become an engineer because of this module, so don't worry. But heat pumps are basically a technology with which we can produce not just cooling, which is, like I said, the technology that you have probably seen heat pumps used most for, but you can also produce heating in the very same way. So imagine heat pumps can do the kind of magic that use air, atmospheric air outside in a very hot day. Temperature might be 40 degrees outside, and they use that hot air to produce cool air that might be 20 degrees. So I'm using this as a black box. I don't want to go the inside workings of the heat pump because that will take us forever. It's not going to take us 3 minutes. But it can do exactly the opposite. It can take very cold air from outside of -5 degrees and produce hot air of like 20 degrees inside a property. So warm up a house instead of cool it. So that is the technology there. So why am I telling you this? Just to say that while in the past we have been using, I don't know, natural gas or oil to heat our houses, gradually we're moving in a situation where heat pumps will be the most abundant technology for heating and cooling. So we're moving into electrifying heating and cooling in our houses. Equally, we're moving from, for example, using electricity to run, so from using petrol or diesel, so oil refinery products, really crude oil refining products, to run our cars, our vehicles. We're electrifying most of these vehicles. Yes, so gradually we're seeing more electric cars on the roads, and in every car market around the world, we see a gradual but significant growth of electric vehicles. And at least in Europe and in other parts of the world, there are already bans, legislated bans for the sale of non-electric cars coming in 2030, 2035, depending on the region, 2040 in some countries. So there's a lot of activity in this area, which what we see is essentially an electrification process. So we electrify a lot of our activities. And that means essentially that we will need to be producing a lot more electricity. So a significant amount of primary energy will need to be dedicated to produce more electricity than ever before, because so far we need electricity for a set number of activities. If suddenly we electrify all transport, because all of our cars are electric, of course that's not going to happen overnight, it will take decades. At that point, we will need to be producing a lot more electricity to do that. Or if all of our house heating starts relying on electricity instead of, I don't know, natural gas, for example, again, that means that we'll need a lot more electricity production to be able to meet that demand. So that is just to say that gradually, more and more of our primary energy will not be used directly by us, at a consumption level, but the consumption point that we, as normal citizens, engage with will all be electric, and more of the primary energy sources will be used at the back end to produce electricity. So that's a little bit of a message of a design message that is that we're gradually going to be encountered as we go forward. With that, knowing that the time now is up, I don't want to keep you any longer. But with that in mind, just have a little thing of how that might impact us in the next few years, and we'll be talking a little bit more about these balances and how they actually run and can help us around the world. Now, for the next week, not next week, next Wednesday, that is. For next Wednesday, I will be bringing you the coursework brief. What I will need you to do, some of you have done it already, have started doing it already, is if you have any burning desire for a specific country and specific energy sector, to let me know with an email. I will not be allowing more than one country or more than one American state or even more than one Australian state to come into that. So one country or one American state or one Australian state, please, as an area of focus, and one type of energy. What I meant to say is that soon, maybe your favorite choices will start getting already taken. So maybe consider giving me more than one option. Give me maybe 2 or 3 options, please. So then we will save ourselves from exchanging too many emails and me delaying a response to you or any of that, yeah? So if you give me, in order of priority, your 3 best choices, that will make it a lot easier to make sure you're at least getting one of them, yeah? And I will respond to you as fast as I can. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
you.
you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll be looking forward to hearing from you, and I will do my best to have a smooth start on Wednesday. I'll see you then.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Professor,
Bye.
just
Yeah.
one
Bye.
question. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Professor,
See
can I
you
ask
soon.
one question, please? No. Bye.